Welcome everyone to the future of gender. It's great to see that so many of you braved the grey Saturday morning and came to join us in this, we think, very, very important topic. I'm Mathilda Tham. I work at Goldsmiths, University of London, and a university in the south of Sweden, Linnaeus University. And currently I'm doing a project where we look at the housing needs and dreams of migrants, older people, and students. And ultimately we see this as how do we share our lives on our home, that's Earth. And at home I have two young daughters sharing a very small bedroom in North London flat. So I'm very interested in this, sort of the pragmatics and paradigmatics of sharing spaces. And gender issues very much come into that. And we know that gender equality is one of the most important nodes in the UN Sustainable Development Goals. So we know that if we have gender equality, we also have environmental improvement, better health, and more financially prosperous communities. And we also know that fin de siècle houses with fruit gardens tend to perpetuate gender stereotypes. So it seems like people in those houses, the women, became sort of more domestically inclined in a very old-fashioned way. But the future of gender is about so much more. It's about the narratives, the meta-narratives, the stories we live by and tell in our everyday lives. In Sweden we have since, you could tell by my accent, my dodgy accent, I'm Swedish, probably. In Sweden we have since 2015 a feminist government. And is that the same as the future of gender? Does that really promote gender identities beyond the binary notion that we so often encounter? I'm so delighted to chair this panel. And I was thinking also that, as we know, the future is always a dance with the past and the present. And when Elizabeth Darling and Lynn Walker and Manny J and all the colleagues have set this conference in motion, you are, together with all of us, both rewriting the past and the present and the future by giving space for other voices and narratives. And that's so exciting, and it's very exciting for us all, I know, to be part of that. We got some very insightful and exciting panelists with us today. We have Maria Paez Gonzalez, works for the Architectural Association, and she's going to share with us some new ways of looking at gender typologies. We've got Dolores Lola Ruiz, I'm hoping I'm pronouncing your last name right, from Little Architect, and you're going to share some very important stuff about education and gender and architecture. And we also have Katarina Bonnevier and Thérèse Kristiansson from MYCKET, Organised, and you're going to share some explorations that sort of explode gender binaries, in a way. So if you share that, explode is maybe a bit harsher term, but open up. And we have you, our very knowledgeable and exciting audience today, and we want to hear from you. So we've tried to set it up so we will get to hear from you as well. So a month ago, the panelists and I had a little discussion how we could make future gender also sort of a how of this panel. So we tried to think about how we could get more voices included, how we could trouble the maybe the power hierarchies that sometimes occur in a conventional panel format. We had some wild ideas. We wanted everybody to wear slippers, and I think you will talk about that later. But it turned out that Katarina and Therese's slippers were in storage, so we couldn't do that. We wanted 150, but alas. We wanted a circus seating, but Manny J correctly reminded me of the impracticality of that in this space. But what we have is we have a table of drawing materials And I can say that some people are already terrified, that's okay. And we have a lot of post-it notes that I think you said that Saturday brains can hide behind. Yeah. So you can use the post-it to write questions and make comments. And we will sort of harvest these post-its and bring them into the discussion. If you want to, you can also get up and draw. I will do some drawing to show you how bad it can look and still be okay. But so that we can start to share some ideas, because we know that most of the future gender will not fit within this session. But we can start and share and have some exciting conversations, and we can create a patchwork that we can continue working with collectively. So that's our hope. So moving on quickly to our first speaker. So welcome, please, Maria.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Mathilda, for that amazing introduction. And I think I'll apologize. I'll have to read very, very quickly through this to kind of stay on time. The work that I will discuss with you today is relating gender typologies, and it's called The Possibility of a Feminist Approach to Architectural Type. But more appropriately, I would like to call it Houses for Work. The house, since the beginning of its history, has been the frame for the reproduction of life and gender roles, a powerful symbol of organization and mastery over resources, nourishment, clothing, women, children, and slaves, and the choreography of relations in space, husband, wife, father, son, master, slave, amongst many others. In canonical texts like Alberti's 15th century treatise on the art of building in 10 books, when discussing the design of private houses in his 5th book, Alberti offers a survey of the house by narrating sequences of spaces and declaring the female domain as to be out of bound to all but closest kin, segregating the realm of the house from the realm of the city, and with this, the domain of women, explaining this in earlier texts by Alberti, amongst other authors, as belonging to a natural law or disposition. This is persistent even in earlier texts. In the La Familia, on the 3rd book entitled Liber Tertius Familiae Economicus, literally the law, nomos, of the household, oikos, Alberti establishes the natural order of this economical law. It is though nature provided for our well-being, arranging for men to bring things home and for women to guard them. The woman, as she remains locked up at her home, should watch over things by staying at her post. Male's mobility in opposition to women's confinement reinforced women's place to be inside as the administrator of the home, relating closely female with economy in its original sense, oikonomia, oikos, literally the household management for the sustenance of life. Now, philosophers like Aristotle and Hannah Arendt describe such undertakings related to human reproduction as labor, the slavish nature of all occupations that served the needs for the maintenance of life. Labor, as Arendt describes it, dissipates. It is indeed the mark of all laboring that it leaves nothing behind, that the results of its efforts is as quickly consumed as the effort is spent. This is offered in opposition to the notion of work. Work, which is associated with the production of lasting objects, a table, a chair, but also a poem or a painting, and has the possibility to outlive human existence, resulting instead in a type of reification. The acknowledgement of these distinctions has not only shaped the physical form of the house, it has in time also become a platform for women's emancipation. Starting in 1869 with the demand of wage housework and the socialization of reproductive labor, subsequently reignited in 1972 with International Wages for Housework campaign, the rethinking of labor resulted in architectural proposals that in fact held radical political socioeconomical implications. The earlier becoming a movement named Material Feminist in Dolores Hayden's seminal work, The Grand Domestic Revolution. With projects like the American Women's Home by Catherine and Harriet Bircher, which we see here to the right, where a model for a centralized core containing the main labor spaces, kitchen, washroom, stairs, etc., is proposed to increase the efficiency of house management. Or Melucia Faye Pierce's neighborhoods, conformed of kitchenless houses organized around a communal cooperative housekeeping center. Women's acknowledgement and organization of labor held inspiring architectural and political potential, however, circumscribed within the house as the feminine sphere, in traditional notions of feminine sphere, perpetuating historical divisions of labor and departing from what other figures argued, like Ethel Puffer House and Charlotte Gilman, which is a women's expansion into uncharted masculine realms, whilst maintaining their involvement in family life and the bearing of children. With different intensity and in diverse political contexts, and certainly with different political intentions, in time, women's association with labor became a project of the state, especially during the periods of World War I and World War II. With Lenin's The Great Initiative described the need for housing with collective services in order to involve women in industrial production. Housing the New Way of Life became the architectural project of the first years of the revolution. Projects like what we see here to the right, Stalingrad Stroy Housing Combine, where not only spaces for cooking and washing were decentralized, also sleeping quarters were segregated, adults from children in different plots. In the United States, and in great numbers during World War II, projects like Vanport City integrated an entire support system of daycare centers, communal kitchens, and living quarters, devised for women workers and their children. Although quickly dismantled or never achieved, the temporary suspension of culturally constructed gender divisions exposed material strategies for the organization of labor in large scale, with the intention to sustain women in the workforce. Now, the purpose of my research is really the focus of independent architectural projects, especially those influenced by modernist ideals. Modernism, as conceptualized by Marshall Bergman, and in a very, very broad sense, can be understood as those theoretical and artistic ideas about modernity that aim to enable men and women to assume control over the changes that are taking place in a world by which they too are changed. The possibility of new relationships enabled by modernist ideals inevitably informed the conceptualization of domestic spaces and the house. As Siegfried Gideon describes in 1929, today we need a house that corresponds in its entire structure to our bodily feeling, as it is influenced and liberated through sports, gymnastics, and sensuous way of life. Light, transparent, movable. Consequently, this open house also signifies a reflection of contemporary mental conditions. There are no longer separate affairs, all domains interpenetrate. Radically abstract and self-referential architectures inadvertently served as a conceptual platform for women's difference in work. My research explores 3 of such projects: Eileen Gray's House in Castellart, Juan O'Gorman's Casas Gemelas, and Lina Bobardi's Casa de Villa. So I'll start with Eileen Gray. Tham Papaya, A House for Herself, Castellart, 1932 to 1934. As early as 1926, working with Jan Wadowici on E1027, Eileen Gray purchases a modest piece of land for herself above the port of Mentot. Tham Papaya, from the local saying, with the time and straw the figs ripen, was conceived for herself as a space to retreat, think, and work. The house's main living spaces are distributed on a surface which took as agreed the structure of existing stone cisterns. This allowed for sectional complexity, changes in floor levels and ceiling heights, helped to mark thresholds along a space that flows and becomes continuous from inside to outside. This is possible by a freestanding wall located carefully to screen any unwanted gaze. Continuity is also reinforced materially. Light fixtures, floor and wall finishes are extended onto the terrace that becomes a second exterior living room. The desire for exteriority and nature was a driving force of her design. In addition, Gray's ability to work in different scales is evident in this project. Walls, cabinets, chairs, all seemingly developed in situ during the design and construction of the building along with local craftsmen. The house was Gray's main residence until the war, when it was vastly pillaged, later carefully restored and sold in 1954. Casas Gemelas, studio houses for two painters, Frida Kahlo and Diego Rivera, 1922 to 1932. 1929 to 1932. Designed by a recently graduated Juan O'Gorman, the project for a new studio house for Diego Rivera and a separate apartment for his wife Frida Kahlo began in 1929. O'Gorman's incursions in functionalism were greatly influenced by Corbusier's works and ideas. And although a pure functionalist language might appear in opposition to the spirit of post-revolution era and the client's support for Mexico's artistic bloodlines, the language enabled new ways of rethinking the project's unique program. A painter and an intellectual in her own right, Kahlo too required a studio to work. As she mentioned to Lucien Bloch in 1931 in a journal entry, she liked the idea of having two separate houses. I can work, he can work. Referred to sometimes as Casas Gemelas, twin houses, these two volumes are far from symmetrical. The disparity between them is associated by critics as one serving the other. Although biographical accounts contradict these readings, describing a much more fluid relation between the two spaces. The day would typically start with breakfast in Frida's apartment, although the location of most of the meals would take place in Diego's kitchen. The inclusion and doubling up of kitchens and studio spaces in both apartments denotes a key logistic self-sufficiency. Also, the frail connection between them through a bridge suspended in the third level almost assures no connection between the two houses. Although Kahlo's creative space is mostly linked to Casa Azul, where she was born and returned to after 1939 and died in, this studio house is where she produced some of the work that would later consecrate her as an artist. And lastly, Casa de Vidro, Lina Bobardi, Sao Paulo, 1950 to 1951. Completed in 1951, around the same time as Mies van der Rohe's Farnsworth House and Philip Johnson's Glass House, Casa de Vidro was the first fully designed and built work by the architect in her new homeland, Brazil, where she moved to in 1946. A great sense of admiration for her new home certainly informed the design. Like a bellwether, even in the first sketches of the house, there is a clear intention of sightlines toward the surrounding nature. The house is organized around a main space that generally cantilevers over pilotis. Dining room, fireplace, living room, and library sit indistinctively in the same space, noticeable only by the functional restrictions of the furniture that occupies it. The large void in the center is built around an existing tree, which allows not only for light into the middle of the floor plate, but opens sightlines across the entire space that becomes porous and reflective to a degree that although one feels contained and sheltered, the space is no longer a room. A corridor sets apart the central space from the rest of the house and connects to the couple's quarters. The service quarters are visibly separated from the rest of the house, connected only by a bridge, which is the kitchen, informal and easily accessible from both sides. Although typical of the day, the strong segregation between the served and the serving is one of the noticeable hierarchies of the design, contradicting from strong social views professed by Bobardi. My reading is that labor spaces are generous when looking at the floor plan and carefully considered in the way the layout is organized. It's seating surrounded by nature, almost as allowing for both parts to be private to each other. As Lina later noted in her last lecture in 1989, she did not have an office. She worked from the silence of the night in her house and spent her days on the construction site. So open space, to wrap up. When looking at the projects together, abstract definitions other than their use, house, office, workshop, are necessary to attain the underlying ideas that do allow these projects to be grouped in a kind of new type of house. One that, in contrast to the entire history that precedes it, is constructed and concerned with other than human reproduction and the containment of the woman housewife. In his canonical essay in the journal Oppositions, Raphael Moneo describes the design process as bringing elements of a typology understood here as the idea of formal structure into the precise state that characterizes a single work. I would argue that regardless of the inevitable influence of ideas of liberation, functionalism, and existence minimum, early in the design process, these projects became rather individual, influenced by their immediate context, relations between work and labor, privacy, interiority, and exteriority. A rule governing all projects is the active search for a space for work, through redefining, making visible, and at times effacing organizational hierarchies of labor in simple geometrical model of edges. The locus of this new type is a larger open space. I'm sorry. In the case of Tham Papaya, her work space physically flows into the exterior. Continuing finishes from interior portion of the space enables a distinct fluidity between inside and outside. In the case of Casas Gemelas, the space for work is almost the entire volume, contained only by the doors that access it. A penetrated volume in the case of Casa de Vidrio is elevated to match the canopy of the surrounding nature, almost acquiring a type of intimacy with the context. These individual manifestations defy the notion of the female containment. Organized outside the oikos and nomos of life, in this new type, there is a material search for a space of self-discovery and an opening, and search for flexibility as a potential setting for creative production. These three houses, designed for or by women, although conceived in different geographical contexts, when collated and looked at together, they bring forward a new and common kind of feminine domestic space, one that is carved out from within the reproductive territory of labor and that opens up the possibility of space for women's work. Thank you.
So, well, thank you to the organization too for the invitation. Okay, so Little Architect is an educational program introducing school children to the topic of architecture. We are part of the Architectural Association Visiting School and have been offering our lessons in London Primary School since 2013. The goal of our work is to educate school children aged 4 to 11 in the observation, understanding, and questioning of their own built environment. Our aim is to create a proactive and committed relationship between citizens and the city. I will show how Little Architect uses architecture as a tool to transform and enrich children's understanding of their habitat. The chosen context for these lessons, state schools, offers a wide and diverse spectrum of children, enabling the program to bring new role models into the classroom, unmasking a male-based curriculum, while fostering a creative way of thinking. Little Architect teaches children to think about architecture, not to make architecture. That's something that I want to highlight. We don't want them to become architects. We are not indoctrinating them at all. So we want to empower children in having firm attitudes towards a local and global sustainable development, very much in line with the UNESCO objectives for 2030. Little Architect was originally sketched out by Mark Cousins in 2011. But it wasn't possible to develop his program due to the safety, the rules for children's safety. So it didn't develop. So in 2010, I came to live in London, and after spending a couple of years researching and testing a methodology to incorporate architecture in the UK school curriculum, I offer my experiences to the AA. I was teaching here in the summer school, and I offer in first instance to Natasha Sandmeyer, a really dear friend that is highly missed. I love you, Natasha, if you are. She's in LA now, a strong woman here at the AA. So she was the first person here at the AA who knew about what I was researching about. And primarily, Christopher Pierce, the director of the AA, visiting school, rapidly saw the educational strengths of this project and gave the green light to the program, which has so far reached more than 4,000 children. Here in this map, we can see that we went to Surrey, but this year, and we have here Meridia and Sofia, we have been in Sywell, a tiny village in Northampton, and we have been in Chatham, again, a deprived area of the UK, with our lessons. So it's maybe nearly 5,000 children, we could say, in these years. Okay, so I wanted to start with Ruth Asawa, whose commitment to art education and the improvement of the school curriculum has clearly influenced my work. She was a Japanese-American art and education activist, devoting many years of her life to create and consolidate an intertwined relationship between artists and primary schools through her successful Alvarado Art Workshop in San Francisco. It was around 1968 till 1973, 1975, and she transformed the way in which art was understood in society. So Asawa knew that artists are key figures for schools, and I firmly believe that architects, more specifically female architects, should go to schools. And why? This is an image from our archive here in the AA. A theater here at the AA. Why I think we have to talk to society? Because after many years practicing myself architecture, I realized that a real dialogue towards better design of cities can't happen if the counterpart has no knowledge about the main points of the conversation. And we have neglected for many years the conversation with society, like even the language, the way we talk to society. In my view, it is our duty as architects to offer knowledge about architecture and cities, to establish bridges of profound communication with society, and to make visible and tangible our role as women in architecture. So, the beginning of the negative female stereotypes starts as far as Pandora and Eva, which means a quasi-eternal guilty portrait of women. That's there, here, in the back of our brains. And so after generations of women fighting for equality, we still find behavior, songs, lyrics, adverts, movies, or music videos giving us a distorted idea and image of women, shaping and perpetuating the white male hero. So when we female architects, these amazing women, when we visit the primary school classroom, we are not just teaching about architecture and the city. We are making various feminist statements. So as you know, learning is never an isolated process. It is contextual. Learning happens everywhere through formal and informal education. In both types of education, we find the official, the hidden, and the null curriculum. Later we can go to what is the meaning of exactly the hidden curriculum in the school environment, but later in the conversation maybe. So the official curriculum is in the UK is the one that Little Architect has carefully studied to incorporate architecture in the statutory learning hours. But what we are doing from inside the education system is an attack to the hidden and the null. Did I say this already? No. To the hidden and the null curriculum. We do our approach from three angles. Today I'm going to focus my attention in the angle of feminist side of the program, but it's broader. And so the three legs, we could say, the three approach is taking down stereotypes about contemporary architecture and modernity. And also, I'm not going to enter, but also about living in community. This is not for a sustainable city. We can't dream about houses for every family, a house, a garden, a car. That's not. But incorporating a positive, powerful, and active female role into the children's imagery. And the third one, retraining the senses in order to grow children's capabilities to observe and being curious, hence improving their critical thinking. So Maria Caso, she's a Spanish writer, art activist, and professor in Madrid. And I'm lucky I know her personally, and she maintains that any act of teaching is a performance. We share her idea, and we have designed the script for our performance in schools like this. Act number 1, going to instead of waiting for. Removing the idea of the superstar male architect. We go to teach to schools. In moving ourselves towards children rather than expecting them to come to our place, we have made one of our fundamentals. We are setting horizontal relationships and generating in the children an unconscious feeling of self-esteem. We are erasing hierarchies. Architect equal primary school teacher. We female architects become part of their daily environment. Thus, we become familiar and trustful. Bruno Munari's call for demolishing the myth of the star artist. And in our case, we are demolishing the star architect. Act number 2, the wow factor and the pedagogical impact of the brand new discovery. This is probably my favorite one. The wow factor involves clapping, cheering, hugging, all of that is the wow factor. and they, Maria, Sofia, they know that it's true and the impact of this approach. So at early ages, children usually don't know the meaning of the word architecture, and generally they confuse our discipline with archaeologists or builders. That's continuously we find that, especially in deprived areas. Of course, if we teach, sometimes we teach in independent school, they know because their parents are architects, most of them. We are a plug. So when we go to deprived areas, they don't know. So showing that we female architects, showing that female architects have designed architecture, control a building process, know about materials and construction systems, know about maths and structures, have convinced clients and politicians, and ultimately make people's lives happier, we are offering a brand new female role model, strongly linked to concepts such as power, knowledge, and care. Yesterday we were talking about the care, how architecture is strongly linked to care. I think it's part of our discipline. We highlight the role of female architects, bringing examples of their work and introducing a narrative to communicate their ideas to children. Alison Brooks, Sarah Wingwellsworth, Benedetta Tagliabue, Anna Heringer, Marta Parra, and Angela Muller, or Zaha Hadid, Lina Bobardi, Gego, etc. And how we explain and how we create this narrative to create proximity with the children. So Zaha, I don't care about this design that much. I care and I explain that Zaha was the super clever woman who lifted a building to run for longer. And these children doesn't need to go out of the building to celebrate a sports day or just to run. So, and they get it, and they celebrate that a woman, through design, is making their lives easier. The second example, Benedetta. Benedetta, the caring architects that design a new landscape for the neighbors. This is probably the most clubbed project in our lessons. So Benedetta found this market in Barcelona. The life of the neighbors was absolutely, they were horrified by the landscape, derelict, awful, dusty, and she suddenly create this amazing new reality. So they open the window and she has offered topography, colorful environment. She's caring of the citizens, and that's the message that we are giving them. And that's a building that I designed and I directed. And why? Because it's not about only, because if not, we would be perpetuating the star female architect, because they are not so tangible. And it's necessary to talk about women. We have been talking about women, but it's also necessary to offer something that they can approach in an easier way. And that's why I always add something that I developed. So this is a building where we included birds in the roof, working with a biologist, and I told the narrative of this is a slide. They really like it. And of course, yeah, they love this slide. And then some pictures of the power of a woman controlling the building site in reality. And they clap and they really like that feeling. Okay, sharing is caring and caring is empowering. So there is a definition of children Neil Postman made, and he said, children are the living messages that we send to a time we will not see. And I don't like this poetic definition because I think it creates a gap too open between adults and children, and I'm doing the opposite. We are doing the opposite. We like to create and celebrate a team and to work together for the better future. Children and adults. We are empowering them and we are making them responsible of the future. And social empowerment needs to come together with teaching the tools to reach the ones in power. And this is a very old example at the beginning of the lessons, and we wrote postcards to Boris Johnson. Yeah, I'm finishing, I only, yeah. And, well, postcards to Boris Johnson expressing their desires for London in the future. We also have written to the Islington Council, the Heritage Lottery Fund, because in less than 15 years they will be in charge of London. 15, 20 years. They will be doctors or school teachers, taxi drivers, architects, shopkeepers, or maybe politicians. So female architects are empowering them to claim for better cities. And really, really fast, Act number 4, and I finish with this one, the AA as an amplifier. The medium is the message. Welcome to the AA, the greatest school of architecture on the planet. That's not my sentence. If you are a member of the staff, you will recognize it was Brett Steele in our welcoming letter. So in words of Brett Steele, there is no other place like the AA. But regardless if his words were accurate or not, the AA is today an influencer. It is a reference in the architecture realm, and as Marshall McLuhan stated, the medium is the message, and the message consists of an independent, self-funded architectural school teaching architecture in deprived areas of London, and this is the most significant aspect here. It is its replica capability and the legacy that it might leave in the educative sector, and the position that we, female architects, will address as the time passes. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Lola, for sharing these inspiring examples with us, and also establishing architecture as a how to engage with society as well as building practice. So we invite our next panelists, Katarina Bonnevier and Thérèse Kristiansson.
Hi, my name is Thérèse Kristiansson.
Hi, I'm Katarina Bonnevier.
Closer.
You stand outside the mic.
Oh, I see.
Okay, but I'm in the zone of the mic. Thank you.
Is that better? It sounds so loud. All right, okay, yep.
And we're actually missing our third member today. It's Mariana Silva, but she's with us on this picture, standing very happily at Lina Bobardi's Fabbrica da Pompeia.
Yeah, and we were absolutely happy to be invited to come here and talk about the future, and which does not have to be distant. Rather, we think about it as something very near, something we wish to grab by the hand.
Since 4 years now, we've been working on a large artistic research project called the Club Scene. It's been affiliated to the Swedish Centre for Architecture and Design and financed by the Swedish Research Council. So it's quite fantastic. We've been making full-scale clubs financed by the Swedish government.
And the club scene involves the staging of clubs of importance for queer and feminist activism nationally and internationally. And our methodology can be described as simultaneously critical as reparative. And the series examines the nightclub as a space and activity essential for the drive to act up.
In queer movements, the social, the erotic, and the political are inextricably intertwined. Oh, that's tricky to say. Inextricably intertwined. Thank you, Jennifer Bloomer, for that. The club produces self-definition, recognition, and a sense of home. We aim to bring forward the importance of clubs for people who do not conform to the binary gender system. We who always calculate with the threat of violence, be it in the streets or in our families. The nightclub may be the only place like home.
A common thread in the spaces we create is to never separate form from content. For instance, we mean that it is a mistake to forget the space we are in, such as today, the seminar room, when discussing how architecture and design play part in the normalization of certain bodies and behavior at the expenses of others.
So there are lots of questions, of course, to pose to a space like the one we're in today. Who have access to this space? Whose preferences does it conform to? Which bodies, where and how press up against it? And most importantly of all, who are these bodies with? This is a paraphrase of Elspeth Probin.
And there are always at least three sides to what we do. Our practice is informed by the theatrical, the carnivalesque, and activism. And together we explore the effects of aesthetic expressions from interlocking perspectives such as anti-racist, class awareness, and queer feminist perspectives. We work to enhance the understanding of how architecture, design, and craft can support difference and create more accepting and varied environments.
We like to discuss, using our research practice as a starting point, the intimate and very reciprocal relationships between material, social, and political considerations. How things, clothes, and spaces all play part in the construction of who we are and what we can do. And most importantly of all, how design, craft, and architecture can support dreams, needs, and desires for a future society that has room for all of us.
In MYCKET, we often say that we work with minimalistic maximalism. It doesn't mean that we have to do a lot of things or make a lot of objects, but we focus carefully on the details in each and every object. And to take care takes time, both in action and thought. The process is open and ideas can be reformulated as we rework the materials. What's more, we also claim that what we want to create is maximalism with minimal effort.
There's a good example of that. It's also worth to say that for an mainly English-speaking audience, that MYCKET in translation it would mean a lot in English. So, and it's actually a name that came up because MYCKET, MKT, it's Mariana, Katarina, and Thérèse. And in Swedish language, you write MKT when you want to make the short for writing MYCKET, so a lot. And so then, of course, that's how the name came about. And then we realized that it became an ethics of sorts for us, and also an aesthetics, of course. Since the beginning of our collaboration in 2012, MYCKET has been working with staged events that in different ways works as reparative spaces. Spaces for sharing and learning. Our passionate group has been busy collaborating often with large networks of people and reflecting.
And anger is an important driving force for many, which often results in a strategy of resistance that circles around punctuating patriarchal and racist ideas and to counteract them. But it affects us to always have to exist in aggression. So when the body is constantly located in a hostile or threatening situation.
Anger influenced us for a long time, but eventually we felt clogged by all the rotten and ideas and the attached forms. And we then realized also, actually, by always working in response to all those things, the aesthetic expressions weren't challenged enough either. You get very boring responses when you work like that all the time.
So to start working suggestively instead became a survival maneuver. And we felt that we need to define what we think is beautiful and wonderful instead, that which is generous and generosity spreads.
It takes courage to suggest, since one has to try and navigate through things, and grounds which are often unknown. And such process requires a lot of support, and we give it to each other. And also it becomes a simultaneous process where we provide space both for ourselves and for others.
And there is an urgent need for more spaces with conditions for suggestive work to develop. And Eve Kosofsky-Sedgwick's text in Touching Feeling gave us words to understand what we're striving for. Criticality is significant, but the promise lies in the proposal that touches you.
From experience, we can assert what historical sources repeatedly show, namely how absolutely key aesthetic expression is for political struggles and change to occur. References to different styles, such as symbols, materiality, and colors, are important in any design project. However, they seem to be even more important in relation to queerness. Or perhaps they're just discussed more fiercely.
A straight modernist expression passes as neutral and does not call for the articulation of the aesthetics meanings invested in it. And time and again, we're met by this absence of language, but that feeds our drive to do what we do. And perhaps through our efforts to articulate the aesthetics of our field, we can challenge this normative silence.
The research that we undertake is born out of the space in between the three of us in MYCKET. We call this space La Tierra Entre Medio, in homage to Gloria Anzaldúa. She establishes the borderline between Mexico and the United States of America as a metaphor for all types of crossings between geopolitical boundaries, sexual transgressions, social dislocations, and the crossing necessary to exist in multiple linguistic and cultural contexts.
So tierra means earth, land, ground, and soil, similar to the Swedish jord, and entre medio means in between. And as we're all urgently aware of, these borderlands are violently contested with boundary walls and weapons.
La Tierra Entre Medio is not a transitional passage between two permanent positions. Rather, it's a dynamic zone, unstable, unpredictable, and always moving, that links us to other ideas, people, and worldviews. It can be understood as a place and a condition where something can happen, something we may not always recognize. It can therefore be experienced as ambivalent, uncertain, and even frightening.
Luftslott, när vi bygger den stad vi vill leva i, translated into dream castles when we build the city we want to live in, is, which the slide shows like an overview of, is about how the built environment, architecture, affects us. Luftslotten tour around Sweden to places with extensive development projects. They're made collectively, and on every new location, sewing circles are organized that produce more luftslott and discuss urban development questions. In this work, lots of different groups take part: newly arrived teenagers, local politicians, museum pedagogues, local artists, elder groups, etc. And when we do these luftslots, the air castles, together we dream about how we would like our future surroundings to be.
The project has been inspired by Niki de Saint-Phal's voluptuous architectures and by the contemporary artist Rachel Shannon and her airborne textile pavilions. The dream castles, they're constructed out of materials that have had a previous life. They're recycled plastics, old sails, broken umbrellas that we've been collecting all around the city after a rainy day. You know, that's just a really great material. There are plenty of umbrellas out there. Our goal is, in whatever we do, it's not to produce waste, but actually to turn waste into an asset. This luftslott, the castles in the air, are kept afloat by faint but constant air pressure from a fan. So we invited a large group of people, like 20 people, and we invited Rachel Shannon from Baltimore to come over to Stockholm and teach us how to create air castles. And we also managed to borrow the space where Niki de Saint-Phal's big cathedral, the Hon-katedralen, if you remember this gigantic sculpture of a woman's body where you entered through between her legs, and inside there was like an exhibition with masterpieces, copies of masterpieces. There was a milk bar, and there was a lot of things happening there in 1966 as big in-your-face attitude architecture. But we managed to borrow that space for our workshop where we started to create the air castles. And there were all these people. Now you have to, how can I make you imagine this in this space here? Okay, there was a large floor. I mean, the space that we used, where the She Cathedral was, Hon-katedralen, it's about maybe 4 times as big as this space. So really large space, and probably twice as tall. And then we had all this material and all these hands and fingers that together both worked on separate parts, but also managed to make a large tapestry together. And then at the end, which is the fantastic thing, and I can't show you it, but at one point, you don't really know. You have all these ideas of what this air castle is going to look like, but you don't know. It's just laying on the floor, and then you put the fan on, and it starts to race. And this architecture is always on the move. It's a very obnoxious architecture because it doesn't stand still. It's always like moving. And then when someone enters, something happens to the air inside, and so on. Okay, so was that vivid enough for you? Thank you.
Oh, all right, let's see. And then I think we'll finish with, this is you too.
Yeah, so yeah, this is the project that we're working on right now. And here we're taking the imaginary, the dreaming together attitude forward. And we imagine that this kind of sewing circles that we've been working with the air castles is a way that we could work transforming cities. Wouldn't that be wonderful to work together in like large collectives with lots of hands, and you can see the different attitudes in the skills and the lust and desires of each participant, but actually together they form a large something. And maybe this is a way to repair, construct, reinvent, and possibly even reconcile. In Råslätt, which is a city, it's outside a city in Sweden called Jönköping, and we're working on a more larger scale project there. But according to the same ideas that we've been developing in all our projects, we have met this fantastic dance group called Mixed Dancers. started 11 years ago by two sisters. At the time, they were 11 and 10 years old, and they taught themselves how to dance, street dance. They're super, super cool, and in front of the telly. And then they started to teach other young people how to dance, and then they started their academy, and now they have about 200 young persons, girls, youth, who participate in their dance classes every year. And they're in Råslet. And they have a really good space in the basement of the Culture House in Råslet, but it's completely invisible in the community. And so we were asked to join, to make a project and dream up a project together with Mixed Dancers Academy for Råslet. And it's part of a large program by the Swedish government called Konst händer, Art is Happening. And it's a project to bring out grassroots groups in a lot of different spaces, areas in Sweden which have a very low voting turnout. So in that sense, it's a way to kind of bring out democracy, I would say. And it's also collaboration with local housing company and the local city council. And what we're doing together with Mixed Dancers is that we're kind of a support structure for this group, and sort of trying to be the kind of architects that help them to do what they dream of. But we're, of course, doing it together. And I think one of the important things is that the first thing we had to do when we got there was to dance with them. Of course, you always have to risk your own body when you work, if you want to create some kind of change. And they are. It's going to be a kind of 3-step development. So the first one is the temporary dance floor outside. So they come out of the basement and actually do their practice on the streets. And we're already doing that together with them. And they've also been doing that prior to us, of course. Because the thing in Råslet is that there is a really large other culture surrounded by, it's the football culture, which is the only visible culture in Råslet. And the football community, they have a large football field, they have super tall light posts, and you can see it when you drive past on the motorway. Whereas the Mixed Dancers group, these girls, they're mainly girls, they're practicing down in the basement, and they only get to show how they dance when they're having a show. So we thought it would be important, and also them, of course, it all comes from them, thought it would be really fun to actually have the practice, but just like the practice on the soccer field, like to have the dance practice openly in the public space. So then now the next phase is that we're going to establish a more permanent dance place with a roof. It's called a cap. You see it on the top there. It's one of the baseball caps of the girls. And we're going to establish it outside the culture center, which is also partly the public school in Råslet. And then the third step is to create a dance palace with lots of exercise spaces, a restaurant, and so on. And that's the tall building you see on the bottom, which we talk about as the TOFs. What's that in English?
It's like
you know how
ponytail.
Ponytail. Yeah, ponytail. Because the really tall ponytail. So that's the ponytail of that. So the cap and the ponytail. In a few years' time in Råslet in Jönköping. Welcome.
Okay, then last concluding, I was just going to end with presenting a book project that might interest some people, or a lot of you in here, I think. I've been co-editing this together with Ramia Mazé and Maike Schalk. Ramia Mazé is at the Aalto University in Helsinki, and Maike Schalk at KTH in Stockholm. And the book project is called Feminist Futures of Spatial Practice, Materialisms, Activisms, Dialogues, Pedagogies, and Projections. And the book is the fruit of the Gender and Architecture course taught at the School of Architecture in Stockholm. And actually, every semester since 2004, we have that course. And the title, Spatial Practice, is a broad term for architectural, artistic, design, and other disciplinary and interdisciplinary practices engaged in studying and transforming space. And in the book, there's there's 38 voices or contributors focused on moving together beyond analysis and theorizing. And the book is notable in the mix of practical, concrete examples with theories, references, and methods, all directed at working, teaching, drawing, organizing, and designing for feminist futures. And also in the book, I guess similarly how do we think, we treat futures as times and places of radical openness in which different norms, structure, rules, and cultures may emerge, an opening for playful experimentation, utopic possibilities, a stage for testing various feminist scenarios and subject positions. And you can get the book online, and I think also maybe the AA bookstore will actually be selling it in the future. Okay. Yes, that was it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Katarina and Therese, and thank you all panelists. We've had a riveting journey through spaces carved from within, architecture that kids can participate in to also shape the future and have a voice, and questioning the neutrality of the modernist aesthetics, but also the modernist project, I think. And I also got the new word obnoxious architecture, which I love, and it feels really both restorative and troubling as a term. So thank you. We have now time for a couple of questions, and then the very last minute we're gonna turn to this table and pick up a note each. Yeah? So if you still have notes that you want to share, put them here, and I will also make sure that we capture all of it in some kind of documentation for the future as well. So can we have some questions or comments from our wonderful audience?
These women were atypical in that they didn't have families to contend with, and therefore the buildings themselves would be atypical. For me, in my career experience and having observed contemporaries, the main obstacle to progressing and pursuing a career in architecture, and architecture is not alone in that, is that the main burden of family responsibilities rests on the women. Would you care to comment on that?
Yeah, it's a good observation, because it was very troubling for me to have to look at these houses avoiding the idea of the nuclear family somehow, because these houses are not, they're atypical houses. But I think in the projects that I studied before, the material feminist projects, for example, or even the larger projects that I call the projects of the state, do deal with labor, with this idea of labor and children. I think labor never disappears, and I think in these houses it doesn't disappear either. And I think kind of framing it a little bit towards the future of this idea of gender and how we women occupy society in a different way. The kind of the structural reworking of how families can live together, or how perhaps this labor can get organized. I think that's absolutely primary to the idea of how do we include women in society in a different way. But it is an unanswered question. I think it needs to be addressed, and I think the idea of nuclear family is absolutely essential, to the rethinking of the future of women and the future of gender.
But I think it is worth pushing it a little bit further in your early examples where the children are put in another building to be cared for by other women.
That's right. Yeah.
Is in a way the same spatial model of the free space of the examples, that the issue is elsewhere.
Yeah.
And so maybe some exercises of, yesterday, for example, there was somebody who wanted to come but had a very energized 18-month-year-old who ran up and down the stairs of the AA, and she hoped he would fall asleep in time, and he never fell asleep. And in a sense, she was as outside the conversation as those plans. And so, maybe just to trace the presence of the toddler in the plans, maybe is something which Little Architect could do, of the imagining of the space. Because in the same panel, we have somebody honouring the creative engagement with children. So, what happens when that merges with the air houses? You can kind of imagine a fantastic mashup of all your presentations today.
And we will conclude in a couple of minutes as well, but I just want to give you space to answer that.
I love the idea of mashing up all the presentations. I think there are very different visions of perhaps the idea of obviously of women in society, and I think the project with children is definitely important.
If I should be closer to your exhibition or your theme, maybe we could generate plans drawn by children of their activities and the way they enjoy the home and where they feel and how they feel in different spaces. That traditionally, or in my experience, is the kitchen. I love to be in the kitchen, and it would be really beautiful to see the drawings or the sketches of their movement through these plans. So it would be another way of showing the architecture through the time that they occupy and the way they go from one space to another. It would be really interesting. Maybe we can plan that workshop in another Little Architect activity. So.
Great. I thought if it's okay for us to take another couple of minutes, Manager, is that all right? So we move over to the notes, and we can share a reflection each just around the many lovely notes we have here. Yeah.
On the kitchen, just to remind everyone that the sort of most famous modernist kitchen, the Frankfurter kitchen, is by Margareta Schulte-Lihotzky, a woman who herself was, in her writings, reminded us, which is odd to say in this context, that she was, first of all, an architect, and that's why she designed the kitchen in this particular way. But it's also a kitchen which helps women to emancipate themselves from the work in the kitchen. But the work that is less known of hers is designing kindergartens. And again, she was not a mother, she had no children, but she has come to design the kindergartens via communism and her work in Russia. So I just sort of wanted to bring that person to the room.
Yeah, and when I mentioned the kitchen in my situation now in Spain, I used to live here in London, now I'm based in Spain. The kitchen is not only the place to cook and to celebrate union, no. In my case, is the place where I work, and the place where the children were when they were really young in the kindergarten. We had furniture for them to stay. So at the end, the kitchen is nearly the three places together and celebrating that.
Can I just say something? I mean, Schulte-Lihotzky's kitchen was exactly the opposite of what you're describing.
I didn't know this project.
It's the kitchen for the Fordist worker. Yeah. So you could
Working alone as the
Fordism and the industrial production and the kind of Fordist labor within the home was actually enabled by what she did. So I think it's important to clarify that the kind of kitchen, and she always said, I shouldn't have built this terrible kitchen when she was older, and she grew to be over 100. So I think it's important to remember that it's not the kind of kitchen we're talking about. It very much isolated the kitchen worker from the rest of the people. The nuclear.
It was designed for one person to work in it, for one. So it was only the one person. Yeah, and also when she got the commission to design the kitchen, she was a woman really outside of her norm, and she didn't have any idea of cooking. She didn't know how to use the kitchen. She hated cooking, but she was given the commission because she was a woman. So obviously she would know what to do in that space. So it's an interesting, very polemic example, I would think. But
yeah, and I want to bring this back to the future gender in a more general way, and I think we notice that in whichever space we talk about, the kitchen space in its paradigmatics or its pragmatics, it shapes us and our relationships as all these other spaces do in their different ways. And I was hoping that Lola and Maria, if you just want to, as a final note, to honor our audience here and us all as collaborators, to just pick up on one thing and just give us a note for the future or a question for the future. And it doesn't have to be as big as I make it sound. So just one little reflection for us to share. Yeah?
I think your question of children and how to incorporate children, but also elderly in society in the way that labor and work, this distinction of work being kind of a concept that relates to the edifying, the production of lasting objects, in the association with women of the production of lasting objects, I think is an important reflection.
Yeah, thank you, Maria. And Lola, what would you like to say or ask as we conclude?
Yeah, no, I'm taking a look to these wonderful notes, and I would like to focus the conversation in the future, because it's nearly a conclusion. Today is the end of these 3 days of conversation. So I would like to drive the conversation. What can we do to be more visible and to have more power, or to make an impact in society and to raise our voice? What do you think we can do after these 3 days that we have been learning about your encyclopedia, learning about Matrix in the past, learning about so many activities that women are doing today, your lecture? So what do you think? I would launch you saw already what we are doing in schools, how we are approaching children. I firmly believe that we can make a change in the way they imagine a woman can behave in the built industry and in architecture realm. So what do you think we can do more? What else can be ideas? So.
Thank you, Lola. I'm going to let that question hang because we are moving into the final panel. So I'm going to say that I've really enjoyed this session and what I see as a really exciting dialogue between people who work with history and people who are occupied more with the future and how much we need each other in these spaces and the spaces we create together. And thank you, everybody, for being here with us. And we look forward to more conversations and more doing with you in the future. Thank you.